All right, good evening. It is lovely to see you all here this evening. I want to point out before we do anything else that our guy, Mike, is on the AV. He is recording. So if you would like to share this with a friend of something, the City of Kirkland's website will have that up as they have had in the past. He is only going to record things that are happening up here, so when you're having private conversations, he will turn the machine off, just so you know. And then also we do have a media, some folks here from King 5 as well. If you would like to not be on King 5, talk to the guy in the King 5 shirt, ask him to blur your face and other distinguishing features if that's a thing that's important to you. Believe it or not, we're going to jump right into this with having a chance to introduce ourselves. I am James Whitfield. I'm the lead facilitator for Leadership Eastside on the Welcoming Kirkland initiative. We'll talk a little bit more about what that is in a moment. I do also want to point out that there are several folks in the room that carry all sorts of different titles and other things, which is probably very important to them. But for the purposes of today, we're all on an even playing field. We're having a conversation together. But I do want to point out Amy Morrison, who is the president of Lake Washington Institute of Technology, and say thank you for hosting us here today. So I'm going to get you up and moving right out of the box. We're going to do some quick introductions. So to the degree that you are mobile, we're going to ask you to find yourself to groups of about 3 people, and I want you to answer these 2 questions. In one sentence, who are you? Yes, one sentence. I want you to boil down your essence. I want you to end it with a period. I guess it could be a question mark. Like, that's up to you. All right, that's all you. But I do want you to do it in one sentence. Let's limit the number of hyphens and parentheses and all that. And then also, what's one thing you hope to take away from our time together today? So one other sentence. So between the 3 of you, there should be a total, I mean, we're at a college. Should we do the math together? There should be a total of 6 sentences among the 3 of you, right? So this is a quick introduction. So I'm going to ask everybody to, if you can, stand up. Please stand. Turn and or go find someone else and try to find yourself in the groups of 3. Quick introductions. All right, when you're done, find your way back to your seat. So, why are we here? We are here as a result of the Welcoming Kirkland initiative. This is our purpose. City of Kirkland has contracted with Leadership Eastside to design, coordinate, and implement a comprehensive community engagement project to engage Kirkland residents, businesses, nonprofits, and the city, including police, on how we function together for the health of the overall community. It was launched as a response to expressed concerns that people of color in general, and Black people in particular, have lived experiences of an unwelcoming and inequitable community in contrast to the city's stated goal to be safe, inclusive, and welcoming for all. There's 2 primary strains of the work. One is around business and police protocols, and this is our community learning about racism and equity. So that's what we're doing here today. We have 3 different topics, each with one sort of large open training like this, again, that's videotaped, that can be shared with other folks in the community, and then 2 skill-building dialogues on that each topic that focus on learning and healing. Our first topic was about being color brave and color conscious. This one is driving while Black. Our third topic will be shopping while Black. It's, I think, important before we do anything else just to remind ourselves of the core beliefs and values of the organization that's helping to facilitate this, Leadership Eastside. There are 3 core beliefs. The first is that everyone deserves to thrive. The second is that collaboration transcends silos and narrow interests. The third is that people affected by an issue should be involved in their solutions. And each one of those core beliefs results in 2 core values. genuine human connection and authentic relationships. LE values authenticity. And LE values positive change through continuous learning and adaptation. We call that impact. LE values in engaging in ways that are best for the whole. We refer to that as shared responsibility. And LE values collective solutions and actions benefiting from conflicting and competing perspectives. We refer to that as courageous collaboration. And then LE values underrepresented voices. We refer to that as purposeful inclusion. And LE values disruption of racial and other inequities. Our shorthand for that is equity. This undergirds all of the work the Leadership Eastside does and should be seen as a piece of the work that we're doing here today. And then we have a code of collaboration. We ask the people as they participate in our programming that they agree to these commitments to authentically represent yourself, your needs, and your perspectives. That means that you don't have to represent everyone like you. You get to represent just yourself, what you think. That you'll respectively seek to understand and learn from perspectives other than my own. I will work to strengthen relationships of trust, engaging in negotiation and disagreements in good faith and positive intent. I will prioritize the best interests of our community to the best of my ability, and I'll be open to feedback about these commitments from others who have adopted this code. And I will affirm LE's core beliefs and core values as aspirations for our community, at least for the purposes of our programming. So this is sort of the space that we're in. These are our ground rules. If you have a challenge with that at some point or you have concerns, feel free to let us know. But this is sort of the baseline of what our expectations are as we do our work together. It's also important to point out that today is not a debate. There is no need to persuade or defend. We're primarily doing a training, a communication out about some topics today. We are going to assume that people of color are experts in their own experience. So when someone says something, we're going to assume that they're speaking out of their truth. And we are doing collective learning about history, data, and ways to move forward together. That's what we're going to be focused on today. And we'll spend plenty of time there. All right. I do want to remind us of something that came out of our last learning together, brought to us by Debbie Lacey, the J-Smooth dental hygiene model of discussing race and racism. J-Smooth not only has one of the greatest DJ names of all time, but he is incredibly insightful. We don't assume I'm a clean person, therefore I do not need to clean my teeth, right? Being a clean person is something you maintain and work on every day. And when someone suggests to us that we've got something stuck in our teeth, we don't say, I have something stuck in my teeth, but I'm a clean person, right? So if somebody brings something up and it seems to imply to you somehow that they're implying that you have a little racism stuck in your teeth, it's okay, it's all right. We're all working to do better, right? It's not a binary. I think he called it the tonsils version, right? You either have tonsils or you don't, right? It's more of a dental hygiene model. All right. So these are some terms that we're going to use, and for some folks in this room, these may be uncommon, so we just want to make sure we walk through them together. People of color, that is the current sort of preferred terminology when referring to non-white people. It sounds a lot like colored people. It's not the same, so I just want to help draw that distinction. Black, African American, right? Some people have different perspectives on how they like to be referred to if they are Black or African American. We will be using words like racism, racist, bigotry, prejudice. Those are not all the same thing, right? Sometimes it can be used a little interchangeably, but they actually are different. And typically when we talk about racism, we're talking about it at a systemic level, and that'll be more clear as we keep talking. And last but not least, just in case somebody really wants to run out of the room screaming, we may also be using the words white, whiteness, dominant culture, and fragility. So that may come up in our conversations. This is your opportunity to begin breathing deeply. If any of those words on that bother you, doesn't mean that it can't bother you. I'm just letting you know that we will be using those words today. So we're also going to be pausing from time to time to do an emotion self-check. So this is one of many ways of thinking about the spectrum of emotions. This is by Robert Plutchik. He believes that there are 8 different primary emotions on a spectrum. And so I just want you to take a moment and ask yourself, where do you find yourself on the spectrum right now? If you have been triggered by something, can you identify why you reacted the way that you did? Are you reacting to agreement, right? Somebody said something, I said something that you like, therefore you're feeling positively. Or disagreement, I said something you don't like, so you're feeling negatively. Are you reacting to issues related to your comfort or your safety? Those two things are not the same. Is there cognitive dissonance that you're wrestling with right now? Do you need to do anything to take care of yourself so that you can ultimately stay engaged? So one of the things we talked about last time was making sure that we pay attention to our triggers and not to avoid them, and make sure we can manage them so we can stay engaged. Okay. One model that I like to use, particularly with the youths, is the stop, drop, and roll model, which is to, when I'm feeling triggered, to stop talking. Very key. Stop talking. And then take some deep breaths to drop my level of, technically the term is emotional arousal. And then roll forward with a question. Like, what's a question that you can ask that will help bring you back into the conversation, right? So that's one way to think about it, is stop, drop, and roll. That's for free. You got that one for free. All right. Okay, so driving while black. Let's talk about some history and some data in order to make sure that we were able to engage in this as effectively as possible. I am going to be reading a little bit more off the slides than I typically would, for those of you who know me. And some of this, frankly, is because we got some feedback relatively early in this process that there were people of color who were concerned about attending this particular topic because their concern was we were going to be debating whether driving while black is a thing, right? And they just didn't want to be in that conversation. I get it. We're not doing that, okay? We are going to talk about the history and data of why driving while black is a thing. So we're starting with the presumption that it is a thing. We are going to talk about the history and the data that supports that, but we're not going to be debating whether or not that's a thing. Okay? What is it at all? There's a scholarly article that has an abstract that I thought was super useful. Most of the hard work, by the way, was done by Debbie Lacey pulling the data together, so we do appreciate all of her help and assistance, and we will make the slides available to those who are interested. So this abstract says data from 60 qualitative interviews reveal the presence of racial tensions in 21st century United States. Black participants expressed experiencing racial prejudice while operating automobiles. White passengers also reported witnessing instances of driving while black while riding with black drivers. Specifically, white participants reported instances of profiling where they witnessed black drivers pulled over by police officers, although no traffic violation occurred. 2 themes emerged for black participants: A, fear that they would be pulled over, and B, motivation to survive the law enforcement encounter. Participants' experiences insinuated continued racial tension between black citizens and white law enforcement officers. While the United States has made valuable strides, we still have prejudices to overcome. It's important to note that, as was again pointed out really well for us last time, when white people think about progress that has been made relative to issues related to race, there tends to be a focus on how different things are now compared to how they were. When people of color talk about issues related to race, they tend to focus on how things are compared to how they want them to be, right? And so just sort of keep that in mind as we're having conversations this evening, as we're talking about things, is just that difference, right, around this idea about valuable strides. I will tell a brief story. Relatively recently, after we moved to this area, the automobile that we owned, the driver's side window stopped working. It's a relatively fancy car, but this thing, whatever that is called, that thing, That didn't work anymore. You did that and nothing happened. Here's the thing. For me, that is an existential threat. My first thought is, I have to get this fixed right now, because if a police officer pulls me over, I can't roll down my window. I am immediately not following a command. That is not acceptable, right? When I talk to friends who were white about this, like that wasn't their first thought, right, about the window not working. Because my first thought is, am I gonna survive the encounter, right? And any barrier to that was a concern, right? So, it's an example, personal example of that. So, I had the pleasure of traveling to the Holy Land, Palestine and Israel, a couple of years ago. And one of the unique things about this trip was that we had on this tour a Palestinian guide and an Israeli guide. And we were hearing the multiple narratives of the area. So every place we went, we had a person who was there who had lived experiences as a Palestinian, and we had people who had lived experiences as Israeli, right? So we were able to sort of have conversations that typically don't happen in the Holy Land. This is a picture that is off what's called Highway 1, which is from between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And these are remnants of the military convoy that Israel used to, as they described it, break the siege on Jerusalem. And they're still there. They started moving some of them recently, but as you drive along this highway, you can still see remnants, right? One of the things that happened is, because this was an area that Palestinians lived in, is that the people who were in those areas would sort of ambush the convoy as it was moving along, okay? So this is history. One of the amazing things that they talked about on this, the two guys talked about, is that along this road now, there are many, 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 many pine trees. And many evangelical Christians have donated lots of money and trees to help put pine trees on Highway 1. The narrative from the Israeli standpoint is, this is a celebration of our victory. This is a way that we're sort of making sure that this area doesn't look as bad as it has in the past, given the fact that there's been so much fighting on it. The Palestinian narrative is, pine trees drop acidic needles in the ground, making it impossible to ever farm that land again. So from their perspective, putting pine trees along this ensures that Palestinians can't come back and ever live on that land, protecting sort of the military throughway on Highway 1. Israeli people, right, or at least this Israeli guide, is having a fundamentally different reality about the existence of those trees than is the Palestinian person. I went to the Holy Land thinking that people had multiple perspectives. I came back from the Holy Land realizing that people actually live in multiple realities. We can see the same thing, but we aren't actually having the same experience, right? The realities are fundamentally different. My reality, driving in a car with no side window, is just a different reality than my friend's reality. We're both doing a thing. There's no question which is quote unquote true. It's just we're living in two different realities, right? And so that's one of the things that sort of gets in the way of conversations like issues like driving while black, is people can look at the same thing, but because of our different realities, we take a very different takeaway, right, from the history and the data, right? So I just want to tee that up as we talk about the history and the data, because we're going to be looking at the same thing, right? And we may even have different takeaways. That's okay. But it doesn't change the fact that other people may have a different reality, right? So this is from the Spokesman Reviews here in Washington State. Turns out that Native Americans in Washington State have the highest percentage of search rate when they're pulled over on traffic stops. African Americans are next. White folks are down here. This is called the hit rate. This is the percentage of times that that search resulted in contraband. So the hit rate for white people is actually, if you take out NA, meaning that they didn't keep the data, is actually at the highest. However, the search rate is somewhere in the middle. So all of the folks here have a higher search rate, even though the hit rate would argue that searching white people will result in more hits, right? And this is Washington State Patrol, right? We're not taking something from someplace else. Like this is here, right? This is recent, and it's here. Until the late 60s, Seattle north of the Ship Canal was a sundown zone. That meant that virtually no people of color lived there, and it also meant that African Americans were expected to be out of the area when the workday ended. After dark, a black man in particular was likely to be stopped by the police, questioned about his business, and informed that he had better not be seen in the neighborhood again. North Seattle is not alone. Queen Anne, Magnolia, West Seattle were also sundown zones. The suburbs were even worse: Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, Bothell, Bellevue, Burien, even White Center, vigorously and explicitly excluded people of color. So part of the driving while black phenomenon is a bit of a remnant from the sundown zones, right? What is known in the sociology work as white spaces, meaning that there are spaces that are predominantly white. Therefore, if a person of color is seen in that space, they're questioned about why they're in that space. Right? If they're not in a white space, they're less likely to be questioned. But if you're in a white space, right, it's not that you just stand out, it's just it's uncommon. And part of that is simply a remnant of the fact that these places were explicitly white spaces, and now they're more implicitly white spaces, right? So Oregon country before statehood meant basically all of Oregon and all of Washington state, okay? So in 1844, all black people were ordered to get out of Oregon country, the expansive territory under American rule that stretched from the Pacific coast to the Rocky Mountains. When Oregon entered the Union in 1859, it did so as a whites-only state. The original state constitution banned slavery, but also excluded non-whites from living there. Oregon is the only state in the United States that actually began as literally whites only. Even though there was subsequent legislation that challenged those statutes, they were not removed from the books until 1922. One of the things that most people don't realize is that the Pacific Northwest is a white space, because you couldn't get to Washington state without going through Oregon, right? And when Oregon joined the Union, you couldn't be black in Oregon. It was illegal to be black in Oregon. You had to leave the state. So we still live, like when people ask the question, why is there such a low percentage of African Americans in particular in the Pacific Northwest? It's a remnant of these things, right? Because that was the explicit structural intention. In order to deal with the quote unquote Negro problem or the slave problem, they outlawed slavery. They simply made it illegal to be black and be in the state, right? And that's true basically for Oregon and Washington state, or what was called back then Oregon country. I think we're probably landing on this one. So a study of nearly 100 million traffic stops from around the country has concluded that on average, black drivers are 20% more likely to get pulled over than white drivers. The study's authors acknowledge that basing this disparity on bias is hard to do in a statistically significant way. So they also analyzed the data using what they call the veil of darkness test. Essentially, they looked at the racial breakdown of only the traffic stops made after dark, where the race of a motorist is harder to discern. The results showed a marked drop in the proportion of drivers stopped after dark who are black, which they described as suggestive of discrimination in stop decisions. Right. So we live in multiple realities. right? This is a movie poster for a movie called Queen and Slim. And the reality that these characters live in, being pulled over by a white police officer and having any sort of conflict with that person essentially meant the end of their lives one way or another. Right? And that is simply the reality, right, that they live in. I think captured pretty well as a movie. So we're going to ask you to, once again, to do an emotion self-check. How you doing? Oxygen is good. Breathe. Okay. All right. So why do people see things so differently? Why do these multiple realities even happen? What's going on? Well, let's give an example. Anybody know who this guy is? Yeah? Richard Sherman? Richard Sherman the Seahawk? We love Richard Sherman the Seahawk. We don't like Richard Sherman the 49er. This one's worse. What do you think about this guy? Oh, ooh, we like that guy. Pete Carroll. Remember this guy? At USC? Cheating? Right? There is a concept called Ingroup Bias, which is one of several biases. We're not going to break them all down. There's a concept called Ingroup Bias. The research around this is amazing. They use sports for it a lot, which is why I picked these examples. It turns out that people who support different teams, when they're watching a sporting event, they cannot see their team members breaking the rules. They can't see it. That's why they say the referee has to be working for the other people. Right? In-group bias is so strong that it isn't that I know my person's doing something bad and I'm going to be on their side. I'm choosing to ignore the data. It is that you can't see the data. This is an incredibly powerful thing to understand. Okay? Now, again, I said this is gonna be in the slides. I'm not gonna break them all down. This is just one of the many ways to see all the different kinds of brain biases, right, that are at play when human beings are talking. But here's a little bit clearer, I think, maybe less clear for some of us. All it comes down to is this all comes down to fight or flight responses. Please understand that the part of your brain that manages fight or flight is the same part of your brain that manages in-group and out-group. It is where you store information about people that are like you and are not like you. This is where your stereotypes live. They don't live in some other part of your brain and they trigger fight or flight. They live in the fight or flight center of your brain. Okay? So, we have a stress response whenever something happens in our fight or flight response portion of our brain. Like that's literally this is what it means to have a fight or flight response. It's a stress response. So these things over here all happen, right, in a fight or flight response. Now, let's add to this the criminalization of blackness. Research has shown that black people are often subjected to heightened scrutiny and suspicion, which begins in childhood. Researchers have found that by age 10, black boys begin to be seen as less innocent than their white peers. A Georgetown study released in 2017 found that black girls as young as 5 are already perceived as more adult-like and less innocent than white girls of the same age. It tracks with other data examining attitudes about race. A series of studies published by the American Psychological Association have shown that black men are more often associated with violence than white men. And a 2015 study from researchers at the University of California, Los Angeles found that just mentioning a black-sounding name is enough to conjure a mental image that is larger and more threatening than a white-sounding one. Okay? So when we think about Omar, right, we think of a different type of person than we think about Jim. Okay? So let's talk about multiple realities. If we know that black people in general, black males in particular, are perceived to be threatening more often, would that not logically create a stress response in the officer? Now, academies work very hard to train against this. Police departments work very hard to train against this. I am not saying that this is a thing that is not known, but it's a logical thing to assume. And that stress response may be mirrored by the black person, right? Who may be having a stress response to the fact they're being pulled over. So now we have an interaction that has two people managing stress responses, okay? Their realities are fundamentally different. They probably are afraid of one another. But I don't know the last time you were in an interaction where two people were afraid of one another. That is not the best scenario, right, for calm, cool, collected interactions. Okay. All right, we'll just leave that. So let's talk about skills to move forward. One of the things that we discussed last time that Debbie brought us is a way to think about racial anxiety. White people tend to worry about, when it comes to racial anxiety, that they'll be thought of as racist. People of color tend to worry about whether they're going to experience racism. So that creates changes in nonverbal behavior. These are the stress responses we just talked about. We then have negative reactions. Has anybody seen on Animal Planet or something, the meerkats? Like one of the meerkat comes up, right? Well, if one comes up and looks around, what do the rest do? They pop up also, right? Anxiety in social animals is contagious by design. The idea is we want to know if someone in the group perceives themselves to be under threat, that is caught, right? It's the whole thing about mirror neurons and pheromones and other things we could talk about that makes it happen. But at which point we then leap to stories and assumptions that basically define the threat, like what might happen. Let's get those things clear, which means that we become more susceptible to being triggered, and then we tend to focus on self-protection. This is certainly true in conversations, but it's true in other interactions as well. Now, we would like to make a difference about these things. There's a tendency to want to vilify, punish, and jump to quick fixes. But Leadership Eastside works in systems change theory. We know that there's no such thing as a quick fix. There's no technical solution to addressing what we just described. System change requires changes in people, so individual people, changes in relationships among people, and changes in the structures that define those relationships. So one of the things that you can do is ask yourself this question: what can I do to work towards systems change? One of the things you can do is to be informed about history and context, right? Do you understand the history? One of the examples I tend to use, and I'm sure we'll use next time because we'll be talking about shopping while black, is most people don't understand the history of the sign that says we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone, right? That the history of that sign, the context of that sign was from Jim Crow era, making it very clear to people of color, black people in particular, there's no reason to come into this store, right? Like that's the context of the sign. Doesn't mean that the people who put the sign up today, that's what they think it is, but it's useful to understand the history and the context. Two, reconnect in supportive relationships. What we mean by this is the research says that roughly 75% of white people don't have friends that are people of color. So believe it or not, when a white person says, I can't be racist, I have a friend who's black, that is in fact a rarity. Only 25% of white people can actually say that honestly, okay, in the United States. Now, it turns out you can also be racist and have a friend who's black. I wasn't trying to make that argument. I was just trying to point out it is actually relatively rare. Now, that doesn't mean do you have an acquaintance at work who's black, who's friendly to you? I think the way Debbie put it is, who has been in your kitchen? Right? Like, not just did they make it to the house, like when you were chilling and hanging out and getting ready, were they like in the kitchen with you? Right? Rethinking the structure of our relationships, like do we actually have relationships that are not just exploitative, hey, please explain to me what it's like to be black, teach me, but actually mutually supportive. Right? It's a different thing. And last but not least, support changes to the structures, right? What are the things that we can do differently structurally that will, in fact, support differences? So one of the things that I loved about what Debbie did for us is she pointed out that we need different things. So it isn't that every black person and every white person is inherently sort of homogeneous with other black people and white people. That's not the point. It's just that when we move into these conversations, people of color typically are coming from a different place and have different needs than white people who are coming into this place and have different needs, right? And so we're gonna do a thing that is probably going to catch some people's hair on fire. I'm super excited about it. Haven't seen anybody's hair catch on fire in a little while. And that is, we are actually going to divvy ourselves up according to race. We're gonna have different conversations. I know you were told in school don't ever do that. I understand that. But again, last time we talked about being color conscious and color brave. We're going to be brave here today, right? We're going to be brave. And we're in fact going to have Pat Hughes and Holly Coling are going to facilitate a conversation for the white folks in the room. And then Malia LaCour and Debbie Lacey are going to facilitate a conversation for the people of color in the room. A couple of things. A, when I say people of color, I mean, do most people interact with you as if you are a person of color? Okay? I'm just gonna let you think about that however you want. Two, we are going to ask the white people to go to the other room, and the people of color are gonna stay in this room, okay? So Holly and Pat are gonna lead you there. Okay. Last but not least, I am going to come with you to that room so you can have a black guy to ask questions of if you need to. Okay? I will be that guy for you, all right? So here are the questions that we're going to ask. Holly and Pat are making themselves. So people of color are going to talk about what are some ways we can be supportive of one another. Again, they'll have questions. The white group is going to talk about what would be helpful to understand better about this topic. What are some suggestions or experiences you have about being a helpful ally? But they're going to have those questions in there. So, if you are white, we love you very much. Go out of this room. Follow Holly and Pat. One more emotional self-check. Oxygen is good. Keep breathing. Keep breathing. Keep breathing. So by design, we're not going to do sort of a report out or sort of a popcorn, how was that experience for you? But I would like you to take a moment and capture that for yourself. Like, how was that experience for you? What was that like? Yeah. And thank you for being willing to participate in a thing that not a lot of people have an opportunity, or at least an intentional opportunity to do, right? Like, people of color do in fact find themselves in people of color spaces. White people do in fact, not necessarily by design, find themselves in mostly, if not all, white spaces. But when we actually set that up intentionally in order to use that affinity for an opportunity to sort of help one another, that is, I'm just going to say that that isn't a thing that most of us do, right? So appreciate you all being willing to do that. So let's talk about next steps. We have a town hall meeting tomorrow at the Kirkland Justice Center. The starting time for that is at 6 o'clock instead of 6:30, as it was today, so 6 o'clock. The nice folks from the Kirkland PD are going to provide food for us. They'll start serving, I think, at about 5:30, so if you need to come straight from work, feel free to do so. The chief and the gang are going to help make that happen. We're excited. And then we will be talking about those police and business protocols, some of the potential structural changes that can happen in order to make things be different. And then there are 2 community dialogues, Driving While Black topic focused. One is on Saturday the 22nd at KTUB, and then one is Thursday the 27th in the evening, also at KTUB. This is where you go, Kirkland at leadershipeastside.com, if you want more information. I should point this out. The person who is helping to guide us through that process is Debbie Lacey. So Debbie, yes, I know, right? She's awesome. Is there anything in particular that you would like to say before we come in for a landing? Yeah.
Please sign up, please show up on time, and plan to stay for the full time out of respect for all participating. So, and they are the same thing on the 22nd and the 27th, so you pick one to allow as many community members as possible to participate in the dialogues. That would be great.
All right. Yes, Jen, of course.
I had asked another, if you did not register to attend tonight but would like to receive email notification about events, I have my laptop here, stop by and put your name and email in before you go home tonight, and I will make sure you receive notification.
Yeah. Great. And or if you would like to get a copy of the slides after I update some spelling errors that people have pointed out for me. So we'll fix that. We'll fix that first. All right, so in, I don't know, some number of years from now, we're going to think back on this time, and I am going to hope that I am able to tell a story, I don't know, maybe to my grandkids. My 23-year-old just got engaged, so I'm rooting for grandkids real fast. Sorry, I am. It's true. That's the reality. I'm hoping I can tell a story to my grandkids that back in 2020, we had a conversation in Kirkland about the fact that people lived in different realities. That the automatic response by people that look like my grandkids when pulled over by the police was a stress response. And part of the reason for that stress response is because people that look like me assume that the person pulling us over was having a stress response, right? I'm hoping that in, I don't know, 15 or 20 years from now, I'm able to tell my grandkids that story about the fact that, isn't it weird that back then we lived in such different realities? And isn't it great that because of 10 or 15 years of really hard work, But people a lot like the folks in this room, that isn't the case anymore. Martin Luther King Jr. says that that justice, right, the arc of the universe, the arc of justice, the arc of the universe bends towards justice. Right? It's long, but it bends towards justice. A lot of people think that it just bends that way by itself. And that wasn't what he was trying to say. We bend it. We choose and we bend it. And I really hope I never have to explain to my kids' kids, what it even means to be driving while black. But that's not going to be up to me. That's going to be up to all of us. Thank you for coming out tonight. Really appreciate you.